In the years that followed the disappearance of the town and the erasure of its name from common maps, the legend of the Midnight Covenant should have faded into obscurity. Yet curiously, it did not. Instead, it seemed to spread like smoke, thin, formless, but unmistakable. Folklorists in the late 19th century began collecting rumors of towns that vanished overnight, of communities that once thrived but left no trace, save for the whispers of nearby villages who swore they had heard the tolling of bells when no church stood in the woods. Some of these accounts were dismissed as hearsay, the product of rural imagination, but others bore eerie similarities to the Whitlock story. Too precise to ignore, one field researcher, a man named Elias Kettering, left behind a series of papers unpublished during his lifetime. A self-proclaimed folklorist, he traveled extensively through New England in the 1870s, recording oral traditions from towns both large and small. His notes make repeated mention of a covenant at midnight tied to disappearances, bloodlines, and strange rituals performed in secret groves. In one town, he interviewed an elderly woman who swore she had once seen the ritual herself as a child. According to her account, she awoke one winter night to see her father leaving the house, carrying a lantern. She followed him, quietly, to the forest's edge. There, she claimed, she saw a circle of figures gathered beneath the oaks, their faces hidden, their voices raised in an otherworldly chant. She swore that the shadows cast by the lanterns did not fall naturally but seemed to bend toward the center of the circle, as though pulled by something unseen. When she asked her father about it the next day, he struck her and told her never to speak of it again for the rest of her life. She refused to enter the woods after dark. Kettering's writings also suggest that the covenant was not merely symbolic. He collected repeated testimonies that something or someone was always taken on the night of renewal. Livestock, sometimes, though far more often, it was people. Sometimes a stranger passing through, sometimes an orphan or beggar whose absence drew little notice. Yet in some versions of the tale, it was a chosen offering, a family member sacrificed in exchange for survival. Kettering notes that the stories always ended the same way: the community prospered after the offering, but dread lingered, and those who benefited never spoke of the true cost. The chilling consistency across these testimonies raises the question: was the covenant real? Skeptics argue that famine, disease, and the brutality of rural life in the 18th and 19th centuries created fertile ground for superstition. Communities that endured hardship often sought explanations in the supernatural, and tales of dark bargains helped justify survival when others perished. But even the skeptics falter when confronted with physical evidence. In the archives of a nearby county courthouse, there exists a ledger entry from 1794. It records, in plain script, 1 black calf, 1 bushel of grain, 1 boy, unnamed delivered. No explanation is given, no context, just that haunting line, sandwiched between mundane records of debts and payments. As the 20th century dawned, researchers of the paranormal took interest in the covenant. Some dismissed it as rural myth, a patchwork of ghost stories stitched together across generations. But others argued that the persistence of the legend pointed to something older, perhaps even pre-Christian. The oaks beneath which the were said to gather were thought to be remnants of an ancient site of worship, where indigenous peoples had once held ceremonies. Some speculated that the Whitlocks had stumbled upon knowledge of those rites and twisted them into a bargain of their own making. Others believed the covenant had no human origin at all, that it was an intrusion, a pact forged with something that existed outside the natural order, waiting for those desperate or foolish enough to call upon it. It was during this era that one of the most disturbing accounts surfaced, preserved in a letter to the editor of a small occult periodical. The letter, published anonymously in 1921, claimed to be from the descendant of one of the original townsfolk. The writer insisted that the covenant was no myth, that their family had fled the town before the final renewal and had lived under its shadow ever since. It does not end, the letter warned. You can run from the place, but not from the promise. It finds you. In dreams, in accidents, in the sudden illnesses that strike without warning. The covenant was written in more than blood. It was written into the marrow of us all. The letter was dismissed by most readers as melodrama, but those who studied the legend in earnest regarded it with unease. Its tone was not theatrical, but desperate, like the confession of someone who carried a burden too great to bear. By the mid-20th century, the site of the town had all but disappeared beneath forest growth. A few scattered foundations remained, overgrown and crumbling. Local hunters occasionally reported stumbling upon strange carvings in the bark of the old oaks, symbols no one recognized. Some claimed to have heard faint chanting when the wind shifted at night, though others scoffed at the notion. But in 1963, a team of amateur historians visited the site with tape recorders and notebooks, hoping to document what remained of the forgotten settlement. Their notes describe a profound silence that fell over the grove as they entered, the absence of bird call or insect hum, though they camped there for 2 nights without incident. On the 3rd night at precisely midnight, their tape recorder captured a sound none of them remembered hearing. It was faint, distorted, almost like a distant bell tolling 12 times. They dismissed it at first as mechanical error, until the recording was examined later. No explanation could be found. The most unnerving detail of that recording, however, was not the bell. As the 12th toll faded, another sound emerged, faint whisper, barely audible. The words were indistinct, but one of the researchers swore that he heard his own name spoken. The group disbanded shortly afterward, and their work was never formally published. Within 5 years, 2 of the men had died in accidents, and another vanished during a hiking trip. Only one remained, who later burned his notes and refused to speak of the project again. From that point onward, the legend of the Midnight Covenant took on a new life. No longer confined to old journals and forgotten letters, it began to circulate among occult enthusiasts, paranormal investigators, and those fascinated by unsolved mysteries. Some traveled to the site themselves, hoping to witness the covenant's renewal. Most returned empty-handed, reporting only an oppressive silence, the sense of being watched, and an inexplicable urge to leave before midnight arrived. A few, however, never returned at all. There are still those who claim the covenant endures, that the pact, made in desperation centuries ago, continues to demand its due. They argue that every 13 years, when the winter is at its coldest and the night is at its longest, the grove awakens. A bell tolls, though no bell stands. Shadows gather, though no fire burns, and the names of the living are whispered into the dark, and those whose names are called vanish. No trace, no struggle, no explanation. Skeptics remain unconvinced. They insist that the legend is a product of collective imagination, an evolving folktale passed down through generations. They argue that the missing persons can be explained by more earthly dangerous wild animals, accidents, disorientation in the woods, and yet, the pattern remains. Disappearances recorded not randomly, but in intervals that align disturbingly well with the covenant's supposed cycle. Too many to ignore, too precise to dismiss. The Midnight Covenant is more than a story. It is a wound stitched into the fabric of history, hidden beneath layers of silence and denial. It is a reminder of what desperation can summon, and of the promises that echo long after those who made them are gone. Midnight, after all, is not bound to one place. It comes for us all. And if the covenant was truly written, not only in blood, but in time itself, then its reach may extend far beyond the vanished town, waiting, even now, for those who dare to call upon it. The hour of midnight has always carried with it a peculiar weight. It is the boundary between one day and the next, a fragile seam where the veil of time stretches thin. For centuries, people have whispered of covenants forged in that unholy hour, agreements not made under the eyes of men, but beneath the unseen gaze of darker forces. They are said to be oaths sealed not by law or bloodline, but by sacrifice, silence, and fear. History is littered with fragments of these tales, faded manuscripts locked away in archives, villagers' testimonies written in trembling hands, and superstitions that stubbornly refuse to die, even as centuries pass. They are called many names in different tongues, but in every account, they are bound to a single moment: the Midnight Covenant. In medieval Europe, midnight was believed to be the hour when spirits walked freely, when prayers carried less weight, and when the church itself cautioned believers to stay indoors. Folk stories told of farmers who had bargained with shadows at that hour, exchanging their livestock, their land, or even their firstborn for prosperity and survival. The records of such meetings were never official, but they endured in ballads, curses, and folklore legends that carried warnings of terrible prices, paid long after the bargain was struck. Yet the idea of midnight pacts was not confined to Europe. In distant lands, secret societies flourished beneath the cover of darkness. In certain African traditions, oral histories speak of village chiefs who bound their enemies to silence by invoking ancestral spirits at midnight, sealing the covenant with offerings buried deep in the earth. In Asia, clandestine brotherhoods made their vows by moonlight, swearing never to betray one another, even unto death. The Greeks believed midnight was when Hecate herself prowled crossroads, her torches glowing against the dark, and those who dared call her name might be granted power for a price. Every culture, it seemed, carried within it the suspicion that midnight was not just another hour, but a threshold, and those who crossed it without caution risked eternal consequence. But beyond folklore and whispered superstition, some accounts feel unnervingly real. Records from Salem in the 17th century detail accusations of witches gathering at midnight to swear themselves to infernal masters. During the witch trials, terrified villagers testified of seeing strange fires in the woods, of women chanting in languages no one could recognize, of covenants sealed not only by signatures but by acts too blasphemous to speak aloud in court. While hysteria shaped much of those testimonies, fragments ring with the clarity of something darker, something that fit into a larger pattern found across the world. The Midnight Covenant is not merely about power, it is about permanence. An oath sworn at noon may be forgotten, broken, or forgiven, but an oath sworn at midnight, under shadow and silence, carries with it the expectation that it will outlive the one who made it. Entire bloodlines, some say, have been chained by these pacts, forced to pay debts they never agreed to themselves. Families ruined, villages erased, fortunes rising and collapsing overnight, always tied, in some small way, to whispers of a bargain made long ago. When the clock struck 12, one story, however, stands apart from the rest. It is the tale of a covenant not only recorded but investigated, though never officially explained. The events took place in the mid-19th century in a town that now no longer appears on most maps. Its name has been lost, erased perhaps by time, or perhaps by deliberate hands. But the fragments that survive paint a chilling portrait of what unfolded there. The town, by all surviving accounts, was unremarkable in most ways. It was small, rural, and built around the industry of a single-family estate. The archives refer to the family as the Whitlocks, though whether that was their true name remains uncertain. They had wealth, influence, and control over much of the farmland and trade, but prosperity, it seemed, came with whispers. The Whitlocks were said to have endured tragedy after tragedy, fire, disease, untimely death, yet always they rebuilt, always they endured. And at the center of these stories lay a rumor that the family had once made a covenant, long ago, to secure their survival at any cost. The first detailed record comes from the journal of a traveling clergyman who visited the town in 1847. His notes, preserved in a private collection, speak of unease that hung in the air. He wrote of families who dared not work their fields past dusk, of locked doors and shuttered windows, of an unnatural silence that fell each night as if the town itself were holding its breath. At the striking of 12, he recorded, "It is said none venture forth, for the covenant must be renewed, and to see it is to be marked." He did not elaborate further, but his words would echo in other documents, each carrying pieces of the same mystery. Local legends held that the Whit had once faced ruin during the harsh winter of 1781. Crops had failed, livestock perished, and famine loomed. Desperate, the patriarch of the family was said to have led a gathering at the stroke of midnight, not in the chapel, but in the forest beyond the town's borders. There, under a ring of ancient oaks, a covenant was made. What was offered? No record states plainly, though rumors insist it was human. What is known, however, is that the following spring brought abundance unlike any the town had ever seen. The soil seemed to heal, crops grew tall and plentiful, and the Whitlock fortune swelled. But with prosperity came whispers that the family had traded something vital, something that demanded repayment every generation. By the time the clergyman visited, those whispers had grown darker. He noted that once every 13 years, a gathering was rumored to take place. It always happened at midnight, and always on the coldest night of winter. Families spoke of waking to find footprints in the frost, leading toward the old oak grove, and never returning. Children were told never to stray near the woods, and travelers were warned that if they heard chanting after midnight, they must cover their ears and keep walking. The most chilling document, however, is a letter dated January 1859, written by a school teacher in the town to her sister in a neighboring city. The letter was never sent but found years later among her belongings after her disappearance. In it, she describes the nights leading up to the covenant's renewal. "They have begun again," she wrote. "The bells ring at midnight, though. The church is empty. I have seen lights in the grove, and the Whitlocks, always so composed, look drawn and pale, as if they dread what is to come." She recounts the fear of her pupils, the refusal of parents to allow children out after sunset, and her own growing conviction that something beyond superstition was unfolding. Her final words are almost illegible, written in a frantic hand. "It is not only their oath, it binds us all. I hear the voices at my window, I cannot look." She was never seen again. The town itself began to unravel in the decades that followed. Census records show a decline in population, with families leaving in steady numbers. Fires destroyed parts of the settlement, and those who remained seemed plagued by accidents, disappearances, and illness. By the turn of the century, the town had all but vanished, its buildings abandoned, its name erased from maps. Only fragments remain: letters, journals, and a few scattered reports from outsiders who claimed to have passed through and felt the weight of something lingering in the silence. Yet the story of the Whitlocks and their midnight covenant did not disappear entirely. In occult circles, it is sometimes whispered that the covenant was not broken, only transferred. Some believe that families who moved into the area afterward found themselves ensnared in the debt, that the pact forged generations earlier still demanded its due. Others claim that the grove itself remains cursed, a place where the veil is thin, and those who step beneath its branches at midnight risk becoming part of the covenant, willing or not, and so the legend persists, handed down through hushed voices and scattered fragments. It is a reminder that some promises are not made to be broken, that some oaths carry a weight beyond comprehension. The Whitlocks are gone, the town is gone, but the covenant, if such a thing exists, may remain. Midnight, after all, still comes. The question is, who now answers its call?